Welcome everybody to another video of Vinyl Attic, and this is a follow-up to my Ozfest 2025 video, or back to the beginning. I did a video prior to the concert, the day before the concert. That was Jack the Stripper, and my co-pilot here. Now I have a review of my thoughts of this show, this closing Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath finale. Now, before I get into this, please don't forget to hit the like button, comment on this video, share this video, and if you still haven't, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell for updates. Okay, so with that out of the way, I'll start off with the pros, and it's always good to have some positive input on certain things. It wasn't just like, for me, it wasn't like all bad, and my arguments prior to this that it wasn't Black Sabbath being celebrated as much more as Ozzy. That's why I'm calling this kind of Ozfest 2025 or Sharon Fest, however you want to look at it. Now, the great things about this, I'll talk about first of all the great sets. Who had a really good set, and I have records here because it still is a vinyl record channel. And so just to keep me at bay, or where I'm at, and so I have my little records here, and I would have to say one of the first bands that were really impressive was Gojira, right? The French heavy metal band, and they played a couple of songs from here, Silvera and Stranded. I thought they were really good, and that's why I kind of thought of this more of an Ozfest kind of show, because Ozfest kind of brings in, bands from all types of the metal genre, and so Gojira is playing, or Rival Sons, or some of the more recent, newer bands. I mean, they started in 2016, I believe. Well, they started. I mean, they're not that old, but I mean, they're still pretty recent. But I mean, that's what I'm talking about. They still had some bands on here on the set. As far as the roster is concerned, of bands that were, kind of newer to the metal scene. So it really wasn't celebrating Black Sabbath or just Black Sabbath related artists. You know what I mean? And that's what I'm going to get into later on, as I kind of emphasized on my last video, how a lot of these metal bands or these musicians all kind of gravitate towards Black Sabbath, or there's 6 degrees of separation of Black Sabbath. Okay, so again, let me get back on who I thought had the greatest sets that day, and one of them I would have to say is Slayer. They pretty much, to me, killed it. They opened up with Disciple from God Hates Us All, and that was an interesting kind of opener. However, a lot of these bands had a cover of Black Sabbath as far as their tribute, or some would do Ozzy Osbourne songs. There was a lot of Ozzy Osbourne tributes doing his solo work. However, they did Wicked World, which was really cool, and they went into a medley in the South of Heaven, and they went back to Wicked World, which was cool. But War Ensemble, what else did they do? They did, of course, Raining Blood and Angel of Death. However, it seemed like the crowd kind of woke up when Slayer performed. I mean, there was 5 pits going on, which is pretty normal in a Slayer concert. It's 4 or more pits going off, and especially, the riffs of like Raining Blood, or just anything they do. War Ensemble was insane, and the lead solos were great. And that was one thing that I saw the tour where they retired, or their farewell in Vegas, and with Gary Holt being in the band, I was really seeing how he has worked really well with this band. And because I always thought of Jeff Hanneman and Kerry King as the Keith Richards, Ron Woods of metal, because they have a way of weaving their leads together and you couldn't tell when the baton is passed on between those two. It was just so, especially with this kind of high energy kind of music, and Gary is just really flawless with it too. So Slayer, you know, they were in there. And so this last one I would have to say is the band was good minus the singer. And I'm saying Guns N' Roses. I thought the band played really great and tight minus the vocals, and they were going into like deep cuts from, you know, this album. They played Junior's Eyes, and they also played, of course, Never Say Die. And they started off with what I was talking about in the previous video, because they have covered It's Alright, the Bill Ward song. And I was hoping that Bill Ward would come up there and sing it, because he would have done a way better job than Axl. And I don't know what's wrong with his singing now. Is just kind of just depleted, and it was very hard. I think with Junior's Eyes he was okay, but for the most part it was just pretty hard to listen to his performance. But everyone else, especially in Junior's Eyes, was great. I mean, you could really see Duff playing that bass line, and he was just grooving with it, you know what I mean? And so it was really cool. I thought them as a band, as musically, and that's the one thing when I was watching Slash play and this band Guns N' Roses, they're really 70s rock fans and Sabbath fans, because, you know, they ended it off their set with Paradise City, and this was something I wanted to just kind of segues to what I was talking about in the first video about other Sabbath eras not being represented here. Now, Paradise City, that riff, Slash has said that he has ripped that off from Zero the Hero, which was from the Born Again album. And it is, you could hear it, it's just a little sped up, right? But it is still the, but you know what I mean? But it's Zero the Hero, that where he got that from. And so that was another thing. If this was to be celebrating Black Sabbath, then, you know, perhaps Guns N' Roses would have been doing Zero the Hero live, you know, and just kind of opening it up. Black Sabbath inclusiveness, right? And just letting it all be available for the listener and the Sabbath fan. And, you know, that is a great riff. There would be no Paradise City without no Zero the Hero, right? And so to not acknowledge that, or just sort of say like this Sabbath, this music didn't really influence anybody, it has, okay? Which brings me to the point of this album here, Live Evil, because this album was my introduction to Black Sabbath. So this came out in '82, and so I'd be like 12 years old. Or so just Heaven and Hell in general. So that was the kind of Sabbath music my older brothers were listening to. And so listening to this album, when this was being played, Iron Man, War Pigs, and the Ozzy songs were played here, right? And so I've heard these songs, but it was Dio singing them, NIB. And until I had to go back and listen to the Ozzy stuff. However, at that time, Ozzy was I Don't Know and Crazy Train and Goodbye to Romance. So that's what I knew of Ozzy. And then I'm like, wait a minute. Then they put out Speak of the Devil, right? And that has all the Ozzy stuff on there too. So from Sabbath. And so what I'm just saying is, though, that there's a lot of people that were introduced to those classic 70s Ozzy songs sung by Dio. That's how I was introduced to those songs. You know, I mean, when I heard Paranoid on this, I was like, hey, that sounds familiar, because it was on the radio, or, you know what I mean, it felt familiar, and just the riff and everything. And then, of course, you know, you discover it. However, Children of the Grave and Ozzy songs, that they were introduced to me from Live Evil. And so I think there's a whole generation of bands, just like Slash and other bands, metal bands that would have came out and did, not just covering Sabbath songs from Ozzy, but Sabbath songs from Dio as well. I mean, Kill Switch Engage did a Holy Diver cover before a Dio song. So I'm sure there are some other bands out there that, would go out and also, celebrate that stuff when they're doing their set. It doesn't have to be, well, you got to play an Ozzy song as part of the tribute. That's the memo that was going around. So, Gojira is like, okay, we'll do Under the Sun. That's all that's that's all that's left. Whatever, you know what I mean? But and another thing about the show, and I'll get to the who did the best Black Sabbath covers. Okay. Now another thing is that Badlands' guitarist Jakey Lee was present, who was Ozzy's guitarist at one point, and he was part of Bark of the Moon and Shot in the Dark, and he was able to be a part of this, right? There were some people that weren't a part of this that wanted to be, like Vinny Appice, the drummer from Live Evil, and of course the Dehumanizer album and Mob Rules. Sharon said that because he was associated with Dio, that he wasn't invited, right? And this is an article about Vinny, and he was saying this, and I was like, that's kind of weird. I would have told her, well, yeah, I was associated with Dio, but I was also I had an association with Geezer Butler and Tony Iommi, right? So what does that mean? And so it was just so kind of, I could see, her being very vindictive about this, but that to me is just like, wow, that just, there's an exclusivity here, right? And so this whole other marginalized group of Black Sabbath fans are being marginalized, or people of not the elite Ozzy camp, right? Where you're gonna have these artists that are there. I mean, so right, you wouldn't have a band like Sleep, or I don't know, play in this festival, this Ozfest 2025, or maybe they would, but I don't know. It was just like, it just seemed like it was more, let's get this kind of star-studded kind of Ozfest bands together, where there was a who's who, but not necessarily. I know it was probably hard for her to get Jakey Lee, or just kind of bend the knee for it and go, okay, let's have him come on here, because there's been a lot of back and forth about song credits and because he did write some of these songs and he wasn't being credited for it, and maybe that's why some of these other artists that's part of the Ozzy Osbourne family. I know Rudy Sarzo was there. That was cool. However, Tommy Aldridge, Bob Daisley, they all have some sort of beef with, Sharon. So, and it's just, it was great to see Jakey Lee come up there on stage, and he was part of the super groups. There was two Tom Morello bands, all-star bands, A and B, and that was one of the okay things about it. Also, is the A and B bands. I'll get to that, but first I'll talk about who had the best covers. All right, the cover songs, and I thought Mastodon was cool with Supernaut. There was a problem with the vocals at first, because the drummer was doing the vocals, but it didn't. It wasn't. He had some technical difficulties. The last verse, he was able to sing. And then they brought out the drummer from Gojira and Danny Carey, and they were playing timbales and stuff and kind of mimicking the original version. So that was really cool. You know, I was like, okay, this may be a great show after all, right? I mean, there were some good moments. I'm not going to say there were some bad moments, but you know, I mean, it was just all. I don't have to have a whole negative outlook on this. You know, so that was really cool. Alice in Chains, Fairies Wear Boots, great. Jerry did a great job on his guitar skills on that. I mean, it was just spot on. And Sean Kinney's a great drummer, and you know that would be one of the best ones as well. Pantera's Planet Caravan was good. I give it to them. I think that was the only thing that I really enjoyed of their set. I've made videos prior about, you know, my thoughts of Zakk Wylde. I love Zakk Wylde. I mean, I was also saying that Sabbath should have opened it up. I was just more not an anti-Zakk thing. It was just more like a pro Dimebag Darrell thing and his brother on drums. It just seems like they're a groove metal band, or they kind of came up with that kind of subgenre, and so it's just there's a feel to the way he plays, and not to say that, you know, Zakk is not capable of doing it, because of course he is, but I mean, there is a certain feel that I feel from when Dimebag and his brother are on drums, Vinny is on drums. However, of course, you had Sabbath's Zakk Wylde playing with Pantera. That's how I look at it. Planet Caravan, which was cool. And oddly enough, okay, so I said Junior's Eyes was good. Just the band of Guns N' Roses playing it, not really. I mean, Axl was okay on that. And I would have to say, I just didn't know who this person was. Youngblood and Nuno Betancourt. I think Nuno Betancourt was like one of the big stars of this festival. I mean, he was like part of all these different superstar bands, right? All-star bands. And his leads on like Believer, the Ozzy Osbourne song, was great. And he did this version with this Youngblood guy. I guess he's some hip-hop guy. I never heard of him. And of course, they went on and did changes, and they kind of changed the arrangement. You know, Nuno comes in and the second verse and kind of does a back and forth kind of call and response to his vocal, and it was really cool, and kind of turned it into a power ballad pretty much. But you know, that was one of them. Okay, now as far as the A and the B groups go. I don't know. I did like the A group. The B group, I guess it had like Billy Corgan and but it had KK Downing. They had some surprises. I mean, I guess it was kind of even. But then, of course, the whole return of Steven Tyler, I thought was really cool, and bringing him in there and because he had the vocal cord issue, and then you had a Rolling Stone member on stage as well, helping out with Train Kept a Rollin', which was great, Ronnie Wood. So those are some of the highlights that I thought that were really great in this. As far as like the Ozzy songs being played, I believe Perry Mason was played. That's one of my favorite songs, and Believer is one of my favorite songs of Ozzy, so that's really cool. The drum battle, because this is all put together by Tom Morello, and there was Travis Barker, Danny Carey, and Chad Smith. Chad Smith blew him away. It was just Travis Barker was just like, I don't know, he was like Animal from the Muppets. It was just like, or if I was to really reach back, maybe you would get this reference, Bobby Brady from the Brady Bunch. If you ever saw the Brady Bunch series in the 70s, and there was an episode where Bobby was playing drums, that's how I saw Travis Barker. It was just, and there was one point where he was overplaying, and then they were back into the main riff of Symptom of the Universe. That, you know, they were playing that instrumentally, and he was still doing his little solo, and Chad Smith is like looking over there like, what the hell's going on over there? But when he came on, it was like he knew how many bars he was in there, and he had like power, and his intensity matched the song structure of Symptom of the Universe. Danny Carey was just too proggy, and he was just like it just didn't mesh. That's all I could say. So as people would want to put him as one of the best drummers, I think there's a difference between power hard rock drummers, and I think Chad Smith is that. You know, I mentioned like Chad Smith and John Frusciante are great musicians in a horrible band, and Red Hot Chili Peppers. However, he's also Chickenfoot. He's played on Patient Number 9, the Ozzy album. So his roots are hard rock. You know, don't mistake that as anything else. But I mean, however, you know, he could play some funky shit as well. But on this drum off, yeah, he kind of destroyed them. And that was the one thing about it, though. I think they should have used the song Rat Salad. You know, that's what I was talking about in the other video prior to the show, is like, you know, Tom Morello didn't really geek out as far as Sabbath goes, right? I mean, instead of using Symptom of the Universe, why not use the Billboard drum song to kick this off? That's just my thing, okay? Yeah, because the guy who was on the End video, or the End concert, who played Oz, he was the drummer for Tommy, LA Rats guy, I forgot his last name. However, you know, I went to that tour, the End tour, and they did Rat Salad. And he went on to a drum solo. I was just like, that's kind of insulting, you know, because that's a Billboard thing, and they should have just not even, you know, did that, you know. Now, these other guys that were on here, you know, if I would have looked at this the way how it all panned out, and how they had Ozzy prior to Black Sabbath coming out, I would have like I mentioned in the other video, how Queen did their tribute, how for Freddie Mercury, how they had the remaining members of Queen on stage, the bass, drums, guitars, and, you know, different artists would come up and sing, and it would have been really cool if they just had a little small spot for the other three to do that, you know, and have Ian Gillan come up, and then, you know, after their Glenn Hughes come up, or whoever, and honor that history and as well, and then have Ozzy do his set, and then those guys come back. You know what I mean? I thought it was just more like, oh, let's throw a big name before Ozzy. It was becoming just a Ozfest kind of thing. Just put Metallica on there, and I didn't like their cover of Hole in the Sky. I thought that was really bad. They did Johnny Blade, which was okay. That was pretty cool. But yeah, the Hole in the Sky was like, I didn't think that James Hetfield kind of chose the wrong song to try to attack vocally. It just wasn't, you know, that is like the range of Ozzy, you know, like the Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath era and Sabotage, where it's just like he's high, like he's just like, it's crazy high. Yeah, I just didn't think that was a good opener. And so that was my little thing about it. And so it was more to me, at the end of the day, I mean, Sabbath's set too was, and Ozzy's set, there was, it just seemed like maybe it was a funeral you're watching. However, I mean, this is not the end of the farewell of Ozzy. Ozzy said he is going to be recording still, so it's but this is the end of him playing live. And okay, well, this it can't go on past this. I mean, it was kind of, for me, it was kind of like hard to watch some of this stuff, especially Sabbath. They were just kind of like, especially the first song, War Pigs, and it seems like, I don't know if they didn't rehearse it, or I think the first song was kind of, there were some mishaps, and Bill Ward, I think at one point thought he was playing the end of the song, and there was still one more section to go off and whatnot. But later on, I mean, yeah, they just they moved along like pros. I mean, these songs are in their DNA, and yeah, they could pretty much play it in their sleep. But Bill Ward hasn't played Sabbath as much as the other two, and Geezer was on it. I mean, he did basically before NIB, really great, and it was just I guess it was bittersweet to say, of course, and it sort of like marked the end of hard rock or classic rock, or and as Led Zeppelin is regrouping right now and planning their invasion of the world. But this one band here is retired, and Black Sabbath, and I just didn't think they did Black Sabbath a great service as far as the highlights of or the different eras, and because they're very important. Like I said, they yeah, influenced a lot of people, like Slash, right? And those albums, and the whole thing is too, like even looking at this, this cover of Badlands. I mean, there's three Black Sabbath people in here. That's what I was talking about, the whole universe of Black Sabbath, where all these band members are like, somehow have gone through the whole Sabbath, Tony Iommi kind of, world or universe, right? Because he sang, he was in the Seven Star, or the Shining album, and yeah, I think that one, and or Glenn Hughes, he took over Glenn Hughes, right? But then Tony Martin took over him, right? And of course Eric Singer, who's now in Kiss, and see that, but they're all Sabbath people, and that's why you didn't really see those people. Like, it would have been cool to see. I mean, Jakey Lee was cool to see there, but I mean, you can't see Ray Gillen, of course. But Eric Singer, and just people from that canon, that universe of Black Sabbath. Because when you look at these Black Sabbath trees, the history and all this and that, like these two guys are part of it. And Rudy Sarzo's part of it, and because he was an Ozzy, and so that branch, and then there's Randy Rhoads, and I mean, it's just, and Dio, of course, plays a pivotal role, because there's people that were in Dio that played with Sabbath or played with Purple, or they all were just kind of just all in this realm, this world. And so the end of this show is putting an end to all of that, kind of like, if you were part of it, or you grew up, or you were part of the 80s, when you were seeing these kind of band members going from one ship to another, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, so that guy's from this band, which is, from this band, which is connected with this band, and so on and so forth. So I don't know. Maybe they Tony Iommi will, honor Black Sabbath, and just in a different way. Because I mean, he's releasing these albums and remastering them. There is a market out there for this. There are people who love that music, that time. And so leave me a comment below, because it was a comment sections that I was reading from my first video prior to the concert, back to the beginning, where, you know, there's some people that were, felt that the other eras of Sabbath wasn't honored and recognized, and some were just straight up Aussie people. So if you'd asked me also if I was an Aussie person or if I was a Dio Sabbath person, I was going to say I'm a Tony Sabbath person, because Tony is Sabbath. And with that, I'll shut up and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.